Was your undergrad? Can you hear me? Welcome to the second iteration of our PONARS Strategic Conversations series. My name is David Ciccone. I'm an associate professor of political science here at George Washington University and co-director of PONARS Eurasia. For those of you who are not familiar, PONARS Eurasia is a network of over 150 academics, mostly located in North America, but also across Europe and Eurasia, working on the region from a variety of disciplinary perspectives, including political science, economics, international relations, sociology, to name a few. Our goal is to help scholars translate their research into policy actionable insights through a variety of products, including policy memos, which you may have seen online, as well as events such as this one, and lots of other new and exciting media on our website. This is a second event, as I said, in our PONARS Strategic Conversations, which is about a 3 or 4 times a year series that we started to put on in March of this year to invite some of our most esteemed experts, as well as people from outside the network, to comment on some of the most pressing issues facing the region. Today's event is dedicated to the launch of a new ebook, which is online right now, and if it's not online, we've got some technical difficulties. Look for it by the end of the day. But all of our scholars have been working hard on this, at 15, if I'm not incorrect, from the other countries in the broader region about how the war has affected politics and economics since February 2022 and Russia's all-out invasion of Ukraine. We are delighted to have a representative or a scholar working on each of the other, say, 11 Eurasian countries outside of the Baltics, excluding Russia, as well as several scholars working on the kind of international institutions and broader cooperative dynamics across the region. Each of the entries in the ebook series is a form of a PONARS policy memo, so it's about 5 to 6 pages, very digestible, very accessible, and we're really proud that there's just a wealth of different perspectives and a lot of new and exciting research contained in the memos, a lot of original data collection, some of which we'll hear about in the next hour and a half, that I think casts a spotlight on many other countries, many other critical questions, and a lot of other viewpoints that maybe haven't been heard as much in the last 2 years. We're excited to have 4 of the memo authors with us this afternoon to share the results of their research and also kind of continue the discussion with all of you. We've got an hour and a half, so we'll hear from each panelist for about 10 minutes, and then I'll moderate a question and answer. So please prepare your questions, and we'd like to have this as kind of a frank and open discussion about a lot of these really important questions. I'll go ahead and introduce all of our panelists right now so we can go one by one as the event continues. But first off, we have Nargis Kassenova, who's a senior fellow and director of the program on Central Asia at the Davis Center at Harvard University. Nargis is a member of the advisory committee of Human Rights Watch Europe and Central Asia Commission, the UN High-Level Advisory Board on Economic and Social Affairs, the Central Asian Eurasian Studies Society Board, and the steering committee of the OSCE network of think tanks and academic institutions. She's on the editorial boards of a lot of other journals working on Central Asian and other types of politics in the region.
On Eric and Nargis's name tags are burdened. Oh, right.
If there was any confusion. Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
After Nargis, we're delighted to have Eric McGlinchey, that's down the street, an associate professor of politics and director of International Relations Policy Task Force at George Mason University. He's the author of Chaos, Violence, Dynasty, Politics and Islam in Central Asia, published by University of Pittsburgh Press in 2011, and has published widely in academic journals and the popular press, as well as done a lot of work for the US government on China's reception in Central Asia, political party assistance in Eastern Europe and Eurasia, and violence and insurgency in Central Asia. Welcome, Eric. Next up, we have Mariya Omelicheva, who's a professor of strategy at the National War College, also down the street. Thanks for making it out here. She holds a PhD in political science from Purdue University and JD International Law from Moscow National Law Academy. Her research and teaching interests include international and Eurasian security, counterterrorism and human rights, democracy promotion in the post-Soviet territory, Russia's foreign and security policy, gender and security, and the crime-terror nexus in Eurasia. Welcome, Marie. And finally, we have Ryhor Nyzhnikau, who traveled here from Finland, where he is the Senior Research Fellow in Russia, the EU's Eastern Neighborhood and Eurasia Program at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. He He works on Russia's and the EU's policies towards Ukraine, Moldova, and Belarus, and studies the institutional transformation and political developments in these countries. His many publications, including the EU-induced change in the post-Soviet space, promoting reforms in Moldova and Ukraine, and Russian policy towards Belarus after 2020 at a turning point, question mark. So I'm delighted to hand the floor over to Nargis. You're welcome to
Yes.
kind of, why don't you take the podium? It'll be easy.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think.
I don't have
Probably
slides,
put-
so.
Okay, why don't you
Yeah.
sit right there so we
Okay.
don't have
Okay.
competing
Thank
computers
you.
for the podium.
Thank you.
But the rest of the panelists are welcome to use the podium or sit where you are. Thank you very much for joining us. We're delighted to
It's
hear
a
from
lot
you.
of videos.
I know, we're very lax.
Right, liberal. Thank you very much, David, and I also want to thank Mariya, who invited us to contribute these memos, and thank you very much to the PONARS team. It's an honor to start this panel, and well, I'll be talking about Kazakhstan. That was the focus of my memo. So, when we discuss the impact of war on our regions, the development of the Middle Corridor or Trans-Caspian International Transport Route is high on the agenda. Although it is not a new project, it was initiated by Turkey in 2013, it has clearly intensified over the past 4.5 years. First it was COVID, and in 2020, 2021, there was a 52% rise in cargo traffic, and then, of course, the war in Ukraine has given a further boost to the project, enhancing the strategic importance for the countries along the route, and we are all eager to diversify. There are doubts about the prospects of the Middle Corridor, and they are valid. But what I will try to argue in my memo is that this mega project and other projects aimed at building the Trans-Caspian corridor can be framed as a new stage of Kazakhstan's push to the west and the changing geopolitical scene in the Caspian region. And it's a continuation of processes that started with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So first, I'll make some remarks on Kazakhstan's push to the west, and then I'll proceed to the regional, the change in the regional balance of power. So, Kazakhstan's push to the west. Since the early independence, Kazakhstan has been looking west with great hope. The country has cultural affinity with Azerbaijan and Turkey, and together we've been pursuing various political and economic interests. And these two Turkey countries and Georgia form the Trans-Caspian Transport Corridor connecting Kazakhstan to Europe and its Ukrainian market. The strategic importance of the westbound route came from the fact that it provided an alternative to the northern route that crosses Russia. So over the years, Kazakhstan has engaged in various programs, projects. In the early 90s, you probably remember there was the EU spearheaded financed Trasica program. Then there was a need to transport oil, and at the time, Kazakhstan set up the national shipping company, Kazmor Transport, started building terminals in the port cities of Aktau and Kory. In 2006, Kazakhstan joined the Baku-Tbilisi-Japan pipeline project, and the new revenue streams allowed Kazakhstan's national oil company to expand its reach and acquire Rompetrol, which is a Romania-based oil refiner and owner of a chain of petrol stations across Europe. That happened in 2007, and then also acquired Batumi port and oil terminal in Georgia in 2008. Here I want to note that Kazakhstan's western pivot cannot be explained solely by the appeal of lucrative European markets. Similar to Turkey, Kazakhstan is a Eurasian country, has a strong Eurasian identity, and deepening relations with Europe is at the core of its state-building project, nation and state-building project. The idea that Kazakhstan is a bridge between the East and the West guides our national strategies and policies. And its openness and readiness to connect and expand contrasts with the isolationist and autarkic stance of Turkmenistan, for example, which is also a Caspian state. Prior to the war in Ukraine, the Russian factor both constrained and incentivized Trans-Caspian connectivity project, but it was not always decisive. For example, in 2007, when Russia did not want to enlarge the capacity of the Caspian pipeline consortium, pipeline in order to pump growing volumes of Kazakh oil from the giant Nargis field to the Russian port of Novorossiysk, Kassenova and its partners decided to set up the Kazakhstan Caspian transport system and transport hydrocarbons by large capacity tankers. At the time, 3 tankers were acquired, however, eventually they were sold after the agreement on the enlargement of the CPC pipeline was reached, and the more economical option won the day. So with the war has heightened the strategic importance of the Caspian route, as already mentioned. You probably remember that during 2022, the CPC pipeline exports were disrupted 4 times, which created a lot of anxiety in Kazakhstan and not only. Kazakhstan's president, Kassenova, instructed the KMG to prioritize the Trans-Caspian corridor. In 2023, KMG formed a strategic partnership with Abu Dhabi Ports Group to develop maritime and coastal cargo transportation and tanker and merchant fleet in the Caspian region. The joint venture has acquired 2 tankers across the Caspian Sea, and it is planning to expand the fleet in the Caspian and in the open seas. Over the past 2.5 years, there has also been a flurry of activities aimed at developing infrastructure, aligning regulations, reducing tariffs along the Trans-Caspian route. Kazakhstan signed roadmaps with Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey to address bottlenecks and develop the corridor by 2027. In 2023, also very importantly, the national railway companies of Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Georgia created a joint venture to develop multimodal service. This year, Kazakhstan's parliament ratified a bilateral agreement with Turkey that introduced a unified digital document for railway and maritime cargo, a move that has reduced transit time between the 2 countries from 15 days to 5 days. So things are happening. He also wants quickly to note that Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan are building a fiber optic cable along the Caspian seabed, and this is part of the Digital Silk Way project spearheaded by Azerbaijan's telecommunications operator. The cable project is not new, and it was supposed to be completed by 2021. However, prior to the war, its implementation got stalled, and was hard to find investors in this technologically difficult and expensive project that didn't seem particularly necessary since there were already land cables via Russia and China. But today the situation is different, and the cables price is perceived worth paying in order to ensure the security of digital infrastructure. The war also increased the importance of the Middle Corridor to major international actors, and chief among them is the European Union. And maybe you also saw that in January this year there was a big investors forum in Brussels at which European and international financial institutions committed 10 billion euro to support the investments to sustainable transport connectivity in Central Asia. The second point, changing balance of power in the Caspian region. These shifts in connectivity are indicative of the ongoing shift in the regional power balance. Focused on the war with Ukraine, Russia has been losing its position as a power broker and as a security provider in the South Caucasus. And we see the rise in the profiles of both Turkey and Azerbaijan. We can go into this later, but let me just proceed, because there's shortage of time. So in Kazakhstan, of course, likes this growing, enhanced profile of these two brotherly Turkic nations. In May 2022, Tokayev visited Ankara and signed a joint statement on enhanced strategic partnership and a number of agreements. The parties agreed to produce Turkey's Anka drones in Kazakhstan and to develop military intelligence cooperation. In August that year, Tokayev visited Baku and signed a declaration on strengthening strategic relations and deepening allied cooperation between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan. And we see that the three countries have been working to develop their cooperation across the board in various fields. And Kazakhstan's desire to deepen partnerships with Turkey and Azerbaijan can draw not merely on shared interests, and these interests have only grown with the war, but also on favorable public opinion. According to survey data of the Central Asia Barometer in November-December 2022, 31% of Kazakhstani respondents had a very favorable opinion of Turkey, compared to 14% for Russia and 13% for the United States. And this makes the Astana, Baku, Ankara axis not only promising, but also sustainable. And Tashkent, Eric will be talking about Uzbekistan, right? But Tashkent is emerging as another important node, strengthening the Central Asia section of the Turkey. So, as a conclusion, if successful, Kazakhstan's new push to the west will have substantial implications both for its national security and for Eurasian geopolitics more broadly. A well-functioning middle corridor would reduce Astana's dependence on Russia, help Kazakhstan realize its potential as a transcontinental transport hub, and make it possible to strengthen cooperation with the countries of the South Caucasus, Turkey, and Europe. And the consolidation of the Turkey belt around the Ankara, Baku, Astana, Tashkent axis will enhance Kazakhstan's ability to withstand Russian pressure, which is likely to grow in intensity and toughness. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't exceed too much.
Great, thank you very much. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you David and PONARS for organizing. Thank you Marlene, also who's not here. I don't think Marlene's not here, right? For organizing as well. And thank you all for coming. I'm looking most to the conversation that we're going to have and your insights. So I appreciate you making it through the locked doors into the conference today. What I'm presenting today is part of a new book project at the data analysis and writing stage of the past 5 years. We've been collecting data in Central Asia, surveys and focus groups. So those will be the data sources that I'll be discussing today. And the project looks at how Central Asians view Russia, China, and the United States. And what I'm trying to do here is flip, I guess, the discourse a little bit. There's been so much written about the great game in Central Asia, where Central Asians are somewhat denied agency. And really what I'm trying to do here is look at how Central Asians perceive foreign relations, or really center the focus on Central Asians themselves, rather than how external powers view Central Asia, manipulate Central Asia, try to get things out of Central Asia. And what I'm presenting here is a sliver of that, and that is Uzbekistan's view, and really just Uzbekistan's view mainly towards Russia. I'll talk a little bit about China and the United States,
But since our task for today is to focus on how the war in Ukraine is shaping relations, naturally the main focus is going to be Russia. So I'll do this in 3 steps. First, I'll take a look at the Uzbek political elite response to the war and to some of the international challenges facing as a result of the war. And then I'll present some survey findings. And the surveys will come both from Gallup, but also from surveys that we conducted in 2022 in Uzbekistan. We also conducted surveys in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Kazakhstan. The Tajik and Uzbek surveys are a little bit more constrained, and you'll see in some of the analysis here, there's certain questions we weren't able to ask. And because of that, we also conducted focus groups in Tashkent and Samarkand to get a little bit more granularity for how Central Asians are perceiving things, Uzbeks are perceiving things in the during the war here. And then lastly, I'll conclude with a short discussion of Russia's uncertain future in Uzbekistan. And I think there's 3 things that I'd like to highlight here. Part of this uncertainty, I think, relates to the economic challenges of the Russia-Uzbek relationship. And if things head south, if trade relations worsen, I think Russia faces a difficult time maintaining its current level of influence in Uzbekistan. The other thing, and this actually really came as a surprise in the data analysis, is there's a stark difference in views towards Russia based on age. So I think there's a potential for generational change and how that may affect Uzbek views towards Russia. And then the last thing is simply shifting strategies, shifting great power strategies towards Uzbekistan, and just the attention span that countries like the United States, China, and Russia have for engaging places like Uzbekistan. So let me begin with briefly discussing the elite response, the Uzbek elite response to this challenge. And I think the overriding interest of Uzbeks and the Uzbek government is, as the overriding interest of most governments, is to advance Uzbek national interest. Not to say Uzbekistan's done a really good job of this during the war period. But there's 2 things in particular that the Uzbek government has been trying to balance. And the first one is a very important economic relationship with Russia. And the second one, and this is really where the kind of the thorny issues are coming in, is perceptions, in some cases, real challenges to Uzbek state sovereignty. It's really trying to negotiate these 2 things that have defined how the Uzbek political elite have engaged Moscow over the past couple of years. Now, let me pick up the state sovereignty issue first. I should note, in contrast to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, I don't think, has faced the same kind of challenges that Kazakhstan has faced in light of this war. Kazakhstan has a 7,000-kilometer border, 7,600-kilometer border with Russia, and there's been major, at least rhetorical challenges to Kazakh state sovereignty. So both Medvedev and Putin have insinuated that Kazakhstan is not a real state, that parts of northern Kazakhstan should be back in Russian control. Uzbekistan hasn't faced that. But at the same time, I think the Uzbek population broadly and the Uzbek political elite is very sensitive to how Uzbek labor migrants are portrayed in Russia. And they're often portrayed in a very negative light. So I think there is concern about Russian nationalism and xenophobia. And this came to a head in December 2023 when an ultranationalist, Ryhor, went out on TV and said, quote, "Since 2 million of your citizens, that is Uzbek citizens, are in our territory, that is in Russia, we claim your territory. Who forbids us to do anything in Eurasia after the parade," insinuating a successful parade in Kyiv? No one. So there have been moments that have deeply angered both Uzbek state and society. And up here, you have the response of the Uzbek Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where very gently, but still making it clear, Uzbeks don't like this, right? So the proposal for Russia to annex Uzbek territory was not well received. And so they invited the Russian ambassador in Tashkent and delivered this message. At the same time, you see Mirziyoyev attending the victory parade in May in Moscow, right? So it's this kind of two-step that Uzbek political elites are trying to do, and so far they've been successful. And so just to give you a couple data points on this, the Uzbek economy depends very heavily on labor remittances. And also, and this is somewhat interesting given Uzbek's past, we've known Uzbekistan as a provider of hydrocarbons, so increasingly Uzbekistan is becoming a recipient of Russian hydrocarbons and of natural gas. And so one of the things that Uzbekistan was able to get from Moscow was this new deal with Gazprom, in which the flow of natural gas to Uzbekistan is going to increase from 3 billion cubic meters to 11 billion cubic meters by 2026. So I hesitate to import causality to the war in Ukraine, and Uzbekistan's kind of dancing carefully around, not criticizing Russia, but Uzbekistan has benefited from, I would suggest, benefited by not directly calling out Russia as far as these increased flows of natural gas are concerned. Another data point here is just actually in April there was a deal between Lukoil and the Uzbek Ministry of Poverty Alleviation, which facilitates the employment of labor migrants, Uzbek labor migrants, at Lukoil stations across Russia, because Russia is facing this huge labor shortage, and so this is a way to meet that labor shortage and at the same time increase remittances for Uzbekistan. So again, there's been some economic gains at the same time that Uzbek government has been very clear to Russia to say, you know, look, our sovereignty is critically important. So we have Mirziyoyev just weeks after the Russian invasion of Uzbekistan saying, quote, close friendly relations with both Russia and Ukraine is important to Uzbekistan. And Uzbekistan is interested in ensuring peace, stability, and sustainable development in our vast region. So there are these subtle yet I think pretty clear messages to Moscow saying, hey, wait a second, don't even think about challenging Uzbek sovereignty. I've got 2 minutes. Let me jump ahead to some of the focus group, the survey data. This is just a top line from the Gallup poll that was conducted in Uzbekistan in 2021 and 2023. I think what's most notable here is you do see quite a drop-off in Uzbek views of the Russian leadership. So that's that first paired bar graph there. A drop from 69% approval to 59% approval. So that's, I think, kind of interesting. And also, I think, reflected some of the stuff that Nargis was talking about in the case of Kazakhstan. The United States has not fared well as a result of the war. I can talk a little bit more about that perhaps later in the Q&A. Curiously, China has ticked up a little bit. Let me present some findings from our own survey in Uzbekistan. So one of the questions we asked to try to get a sense of Uzbekistan's view towards Russia, China, and the United States during the war. And remember, we couldn't really ask, we weren't allowed to ask direct questions about the war. That we were told by our partners in Uzbekistan that would put them in peril. So we asked these open-ended questions, and one of the questions we asked is, who's Uzbekistan's main friend? What we found here is that 54% of respondents cited Russia, 5% cited China, and only 1% cited the United States. I suppose not terribly surprising given Uzbekistan's familiarity with Russia, but still I think it is somewhat sobering, at least from the point of view of Washington, that Washington doesn't figure very highly. This is the one that surprised me. One of the questions we asked is, what's your sentiment? Do you have a positive sentiment? Do you feel positively towards these following countries? Russia, China, and the United States. And Russia overall fared the best among our survey respondents. So 76% of Uzbeks were favorably inclined towards Russia, whereas only 52 and 45 were favorably inclined towards China and the United States, respectively. But what was interesting is if you drill down into the data a little bit, and if you look at only those Uzbeks between the ages of 18 and 29, the United States does a lot better. So 60% view the United States favorably, and 61% view China favorably, whereas Russia drops to 56%. So there's some generational dynamic going on here, I think, that bears closer investigation, and potentially might be troubling for Moscow going into the future. Around 11 minutes. Can I go through a couple of the focus group? Okay. Again, I said we were a little bit constrained in what we could ask in the survey, so we also went to focus group analysis in Samarkand and Tashkent, and I'll just give you a few highlights that came out. And really what I'm trying to get at here is this idea of economics and how important that economic relationship is between Uzbekistan and Russia. So one person said, look, we're familiar with Russia. We've been in a union with Russia for many years, so we understand Russia, and that's why we're interested in what's going on, but we're very much worried about how the war might affect us. Another respondent, Samarkand, said, the war is leading to inflation, leading to rising food prices. So when Uzbeks look at the war, one of the things that they're most concerned about is the negative economic impact it's having on the country. And then lastly, just to take a look at how they view the United States. So one of the questions that we were able to ask in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan was, who's responsible for the war in Ukraine? We weren't allowed to ask this question in Uzbekistan, but in the focus groups, a sentiment emerged that was very similar to the sentiment that we found in the surveys, and that is the U.S. comes off very, very poorly in the wake of the Russian invasion. So there's this perception that the war is Washington's responsibility, that Washington has been funding Ukraine and has been provoking the war. There's also these very negative views. This, Biden looks like a lizard. He's clumsy. He falls down the stairs. There's a very negative perception of the United States, and that tracks with what we found. And this will be the last slide. What we found with our surveys in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. So if you look at the bottommost bar chart, the overwhelming majority of Kyrgyz and the majority of Kazakh all point to the United States as being responsible for the war in Ukraine. I don't know if we would have gotten the same result if we did this in Uzbekistan. The focus groups do suggest similar sentiments. I'm going to hold off on that final slide where we're talking about Russia's uncertain future. I think I kind of talked about this in the introduction. A lot of this is going to depend on the economics and on generational change. So thank you, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. That's right. You have slides.
Yes. All right. Intentionally provocative. What is considered extinct may never die. The future of Russia-led organizations in Europe. And if I appear to be excited, it's part of my personality. I'm also very, very curious about what I'm about to talk. Not that I'm excited about, these organizations. So, as you all know, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia was a watershed event in so many different ways, including in affecting perceptions of threats posed by Russia by Russia's neighbors. And Central Asian republics haven't been an exception to this rule. So they've been reassessing how much of a threat Russia has been posing to them. They've been trying really hard to decouple themselves from Russia's military affairs and have sought to diversify their political, economic, security ties with countries other than the Russian Federation. And for many experts, all this has come to mean that Russia-led projects, most notably the Eurasian Economic Union, EU, and the Collective Security Treaty Organization, they are doomed. They're inevitably going to disappear. And one thing that really, not one, but several things really piqued my curiosity are as follows. The Eurasian European Union, it's an organization that was supposed to institute European Union-like free trade space among Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, Belarus. It really had a lot of difficulty at the beginning because it was unveiled in 2015, and that coincided with economic crisis in Russia caused by the first tranche of Western sanctions imposed on Russia in the wake of its illegal annexation of Crimea. Then there were plummeting oil prices, so Russia's economy spiraled down, trickle-down effects on the economies of the members of the EU. So it never really evolved into the kind of economic union that European Union is. But interestingly, and what this graph shows is that that organization that was previously very, very clunky in facilitating trade among its members saw a significant increase in exports of Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan to Russia, but also non-EU members' exports to Russia, most notably Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. And when we look at the Collective Security Treaty Organization, well, Armenia just recently froze its membership in the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and its president called out that organization for being ineffective in the wake of the violent conflict with Azerbaijan. We know that Kyrgyzstan disavowed the joint trainings on its territory in the wake of the violent border clashes with Tajikistan. But at the same time, there is a lot going on under the radar, including a whole slew of anti-terrorism drills. The Tajikistan government has asked the CSTO to be part of the border monitoring with Afghanistan, and there is a project that is being actively discussed by all members that is on books, and so on and so forth. And so what I thought is that, and here I think in parallel with the literature on authoritarian persistence, for a long time we looked at authoritarian resiliencies through the lens of democratization. They were kind of flawed democracies. There was something, inherently flawed with the way how they democratized. But currently, we approach those authoritarian regimes through unique to them lens. So they are not authoritarian by default, rather they are authoritarian by design. And I think that we need to look at these organizations that are made up of largely authoritarian governments through lens that are different from traditional institutionalist lens or the lens of realist international relations policy, because these organizations have not really fostered integration or economic cooperation. They have failed as collective security treaty organizations. Russia no longer wields dominant, decisive power in either one of them. So what I propose instead is to look at them as kind of risk and opportunity management projects that have been utilized by the ruling elites to various political ends. And so long as these organizations continue benefiting elites of the member states of these organizations, they will persist. And in the remainder of my presentation, I'll just give you some examples of the ongoing benefits that these organizations pose to the elites of the member states. So, as I already said, the reselling goods to Russia have been very beneficial to all EU members, but also Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. These benefits may decline in 2024 because there will be stricter enforcement of secondary sanctions, and the EU just imposed the rule that will require countries like EU member states buying goods from the European suppliers to not resell them to the third parties like Russia. But what Eric and Nargis discussed already, Russia's cheap energy, the supply of cheap energy, cheap petroleum resources met high demand in Central Asian republics that have been plagued by energy outages and the lack of petroleum resources. The so-called tripartite gas union that Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan do not want to call union, but nevertheless they did sign requisite contracts. So there's clearly benefit from the increased supply of Russia's petroleum products and some investments in this country's dilapidated energy or electricity sector. And both are highly critical for social stability because one of the threats as perceived by the ruling administrations in the States is the social instability that sometimes stems from electricity outages and so on and so forth. I also think that these governments are banking on benefiting from this long-term prospects of becoming the critical hubs in the international logistics and transport routes. So Nargis talked about the so-called middle corridor, and this is very important. What I'm going to talk about is another project, the north-south transport corridor, which in effect a combination of 3 different routes, but all of them run through to a certain extent, through Central Asia and North Caucasus, and some are more promising than others, but these projects are also witnessing the increase in the cargo throughput, not all of them, but particularly the northern ones. There have been recently a pact signed with Iran to bring him into the EU free trade space. The similar agreement is being formally negotiated with India, and some of lesser significant agreements have been reached with Middle Eastern countries, and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to say here is that whether or not all of these northern, south to north transit routes come to fruition or not, all of them have limitations and obstacles to implementation. These countries, in one way or another, stand to benefit from the competition between the US and EU-backed middle corridor, Iran, India, China backed north-south routes. They will benefit from investments flown into these countries to stand up transportation infrastructure and whatnot. And let me say just a few words about CSTO. My own thinking about the CSTO has evolved. Today, I think of this organization as beneficial to its members because of A, it is a kind of platform of authoritarian solidarity, and we witnessed strengthening of authoritarian, not loosening of authoritarian rule, but strengthening of authoritarian rule in all of these republics. And many analysts actually consider the only time the CSTO troops were used in Kazakhstan during the Bloody Sunday, it had a very symbolic effect. It had an effect of supporting, backing the regime of President Tokayev. So it has been used as a platform and will be used as a platform of authoritarian solidarity. Again, counterterrorism drills, this is something that Russia capitalized on initially to really strengthen the CSTO. Particularly Tajikistan nowadays, that doesn't see eye to eye with Taliban, doesn't recognize Taliban, recognize the anti-Taliban movement. It is really trying to bring support from whoever can provide this support, China, the United States, Russia, CSTO. And we shouldn't forget that up to this day, even though there have been an effort to diversify away from Russia's security assistance and weapons assistance, Russia is still the major supplier of weapons and even training. And we can talk about it, especially the officer corps. So, to bring it all together, because I view these organizations as the kind of opportunity and risk management projects that are beneficial to the elites, and the elites are the autocratic rulers, I don't think these organizations are going to disappear or change unless there is a meaningful change in the governance inside the member states. And I also think that these organizations, their existence comport really well with the Central Asian multi-vector foreign policy that reflects them. And again, I'm not saying that Russia is going to be the one who's going to dominate and dictate these countries what to do and what not to do. These countries are actors in their own right, and they've been trying to implement the multi-vector foreign policy. And so I don't think these countries want any particular country, be that the United States or China or Russia, to dictate them. And so they're going to be part of this organization so long as, again, it plays the role of hedging against the risk and capitalizing on the opportunities that these groups represent. Thank you.
Thank you. Final speaker, Ryhor.
I'm using the best Belarusian technology, pen and paper, so no PowerPoint. Well, thank you so much, David, for this kind introduction, and it's really a pleasure to be part of this panel. And the project And in my talk, I'll primarily focus on the effects of the war on Belarus. And here I would like to come forward with 3 major points I make. The first one is that the war, together with the ongoing political crisis, which has been going on since 2020, has accelerated the de-sovereignization of Belarus. So what we do see is the intensification of the primarily military political subordination to Russia, right? So we do see also subduing of a number of state policies at a sectoral level, sometimes voluntarily. Relatedly, we do see that the regime as such has been weakened since 2020. But paradoxically, the war actually has stabilized Lukashenko's own holding power, and more importantly, guarantees that Lukashenko actually will remain in power until the current conditions, meaning that as long as the war continues. And the third one is that basically what we see is that there is really, in absence of any agency to challenge, or let's say exploit the weaknesses of the regime, be it the Belarusian opposition in exile or the West, it is likely that this status quo will exactly continue until the end of the war, which outcome will actually determine the future of Belarus as a country. So let me just briefly go after each of these points. So the first one, we do see that the regime has been profoundly weakened. What we can say is that the foundations of this regime, which has been the backbone of Lukashenko's and his regime's stability for over 25 years, has been largely shattered. So we do see that the regime lost domestic monopoly on power, that the regime actually no longer has any type of a social contract with the society, and the relationship with the society now is beyond repair. Hence, these massive repressions will be going on and going on until the regime basically collapses. And obviously, the third one, the so-called special relationship with Moscow, meaning that the Belarus had to benefit a lot, but due to its ability to at least have a kind of a, I would say, a cloud of a possibility of multi-vector foreign policy, meaning that it can actually turn to the West at some point. It basically, altogether, these 3 pillars together guaranteed that Lukashenko could easily, not easily, but he could, and his regime could actually withstand Russia's increased pressure at certain points. So now we see that all of this is gone. So we do see that even de jure, the constitutional changes in the country give much more power sharing and actually create some kind of a time bomb with new institutions created under the regime, which he placed himself. We do see that, as I said, relations with the society are irreparable. And the third one, obviously, that relations with the West are done and gone. So there will be no possibility to substitute that. Hence, the regime lost an important bargaining tool in dealing with Moscow. This has been acknowledged by the regime and Lukashenko. So he totally understands the situation he is in. So what we do see is that, knowing that his power currently depends on Moscow, he basically became the main instrument and the main conduit of the Russia's interests in the country. So he basically became the main promoter of Russia's interests in Belarus. The main effect of this, what we see, and something which is obviously the dearest to Russia and to Vladimir Putin, is that Minsk voluntarily agreed to military political subordination to Russia. We can see it a lot in how the war goes and how the regime supports Moscow in its war, but we also see several key elements to that. The first one is that the regime basically de facto agreed to forget about independent foreign policy. And there are a lot of anecdotal evidence when they meet in Kremlin before Lukashenko goes to Africa and he says, well, thanks for your basically list of wishes, I'll do it while meeting with the African leaders. Definitely, we do see that the regime bandwagons Moscow on absolutely any initiative, also in the regional organizations. And importantly, again, we see that even theoretically, the regime lost any chance to find a substitute to this, to the West as a possible instrument to somehow balance Moscow. None of the non-Western powers would even theoretically consider going against Moscow just to back out Lukashenko and his standing. So China, India, whoever he actually tries to reach out to, understand that Belarus is a part of the Russia sphere of influence and acts accordingly. Secondly, we do see that there is absolutely an overhaul, substantial overhaul of the Belarus military security policies. We do see that since 2022, Belarus gave up on three major, let's say, red flags in its military relations with Russia, and in principle on its military policy. The first one is it actually gave up on neutrality. And actually, new constitution permits stationing of foreign troops in the country, including nuclear weapons, which was done basically right away. There is a U-turn on non-deployment of Belarusian troops abroad, which was immediately affected during the CSTO mission in Kazakhstan. And there is, I forgot the third one, but the third element overall is that basically Belarus lost any foreign trade independence. 90% of Belarusian trade is either going to Moscow or to Russia, or directly dependent on Russia providing logistics and infrastructure to actually deliver this, to do this trade, and then as a main economic main element of country's economic viability. And here we come to the third point, which is, in these conditions, this profoundly reshapes the regime as such. So, and the regime actually is becoming proactive in this, moving it closer in its policies to just what Russia wants, without actual Russian pressure on demand in a number of areas. So this primarily means that since 22, the state follows up the regime, actually simply pursues a new state and nation building policies, which in its view are accommodating to Moscow. This is a profound change. It's has been shown on many levels, and if we can summarize it in a very brief, it's built on the formula, Siloviki, Putin, and Russian world. So the state securitizes, militarizes, borrowing whatever Moscow comes up itself in Russia and implements in the country, including some type of a military lessons for school pupils, or special new books, textbooks on the history of 20th century and beyond, which is written together between Belarusian General Prosecutor's Office and their sometimes Russian counterparts. And what is important, it's what I mentioned before, many of this is done voluntarily. So if we look at latest initiatives which has significant importance, like the tax policy, Lukashenko's regime gave up on its tax sovereignty, basically offering this to Moscow in exchange for oil subsidies. So this is something that the regime is actively pursuing, knowing that its future mostly depends on its relations with Russia, or is, if we probably even simplify it more, on ability of Lukashenko to please Vladimir Putin. So just to sum up, just last minute, and we're going to probably go back to the most interesting part, Q&A session. So this sort of exposure to Russian dominance will be only growing the longer the war goes. And in itself, only the end of the war and the Russia's, let's say, collapse of its broader ambition or even partial success will be determining how Belarus is going to look. It's probably the contours of its sovereignty and independence. So I'll stop here on a cheerful note.
Thank you very much. All right, we have about a half hour for questions from the audience. I think we should get right to it and take a first round and see where we're at. If you could please just introduce yourself, your name and your affiliation, that would be really helpful. There you are, all the way in the back.
Mark Katz, George Mason University. Thanks for such a great presentation, all of you. I'm just wondering, can you tell us anything about what we've seen about Russian arms transfers to Central Asia since the beginning of the war? I know in other parts of the world you've seen this drop off, and in fact, Russia's actually been buying back arms from some countries. And I'm just wondering, in other words, if Russia advertises itself as a security provider for Central Asia, what have we seen in this department, if you can help us? Thanks.
Thanks. I think we can take a couple other questions.
So, Michael, I'm a PhD student at Purdue University, and I focus on disinformation. So I would love to hear about how, Russia's with the war in Ukraine, how they may have used disinformation or to in these Central Asian states, especially when we look at who caused the war, where we saw where a lot of people said that the U.S. Could this have been through Russian disinformation, or did that have an effect?
Jeff Hancock, National Defense University. I want to ask a question that's actually related to the one that Mark Katz asked. I know we haven't talked about the South Caucasus issue, but one of the interesting dynamics in the last couple of years has been Turkey's eruption into the South Caucasus through the strategic partnership with Azerbaijan, a lot of which encompasses military cooperation and arms sales. And I know that there are people in both Ankara and Baku who see that model as something that Turkey can export to other countries in the Turkic world. And Nargis, you mentioned the arms deal with Kazakhstan. So I was wondering to what extent you see Turkey potentially acting as a replacement for Russia as an arms provider, and what the implications of that would be for some topics in the discussion here, including the role of the CSTO, including the ability of some other countries in Central Asia to pursue a more multilateral foreign policy.
Why don't we start there? We'll get to the next round in a couple minutes. I think there's enough for everybody to chew on. Nargis, you want to start us off? We'll go in the same order, then we'll reverse that.
Yeah, on Russian arms transfers to Central Asia, I don't know the numbers. What I was checking last year, indeed there was a decrease. What CIPRI published. Yeah. So, and that makes sense, right? If they need to import from everywhere else. Well, we have Sanat here, maybe Sanat knows. Mariya knows. On disinformation, I think it's more propaganda rather than because people in Central Asia, many people in Central Asia watch Russian TV, so they kind of consume these narratives and absorb these narratives. So disinformation, there is that as well, usually through kind of social media and not only, but like something about the biosafety labs, for example, right, and this kind of stuff. But I would say it's propaganda primarily. And on Jeff's question, that's exactly why I wanted to write this policy memo. I think something is happening, because definitely Turkey, Azerbaijan, kind of, as I wrote in the paper, the profile is up, right? The Azerbaijan is emerged, as kind of a regional power. Turkey very much so. Both kind of manage their relations with Russia very skillfully, right? And Kazakhstan is part of the group, right? There will be military exercises in the Caspian this summer, right? And with Azerbaijan, so something's definitely happening. But I don't think kind of the replacement is on the agenda because the ties with Russia are so strong. You cannot really replace Russia with Turkey. But definitely this vector is becoming even more important, the Turkish and the Turkic vector. So it creates a bit more, makes it a bit easier to manage relations with Russia. This way.
So about the arms transfer. Before 2022's Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russia was the second largest supplier of arms, second to the United States. Worldwide. Yes, worldwide. So it definitely dropped. I don't know where it dropped. A lot of contracts have been put on hold. So I do not know exactly what the numbers are, but I do know that what makes Russia still somewhat attractive security provider when it comes to arms supplies is the cost. It is, especially to the CSTO members, it is slightly discounted. I do know that the training is ongoing. In 2021, 2022, almost 600 Kazakh service persons received training in Russia's institutions of professional military education. I don't know what the numbers are. I would guess 400, 500. So it's still significant relative to other countries, including the United States, where a year-long program funded by the Department of State through the IMED, International Military Education Program, is very, very, very expensive. The other thing that makes Russia is still quite attractive is that the United States and some other Western arms suppliers are hesitant to transfer sensitive military technologies precisely because these republics are so linked in with Russia, so there is a fear that some of those technologies will be siphoned off. Russia will learn, and so some of the needs of these republics cannot be met elsewhere. Third, this is what we've seen with India in particular, but I also think in Kazakhstan, and maybe to a lesser extent in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, that there is interest in standing up domestic military industrial complexes, and Russia has been much more forthcoming in helping to do that than many other Western arms suppliers who see competition in these kinds of partnerships. Having said that, I think it's also important to recognize where the demands are. The demands have been from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan in drones. So going back to Jeff's question is, where Turkey has made significant inroads is in supplying drones to Kyrgyzstan. So there is quite a variation in terms of the kind of relationships that these individual Central Asian republics have built with Turkey. I would argue that the closest ties that have emerged, those have been between Turkey and Kyrgyzstan, especially under Atambayev. But there is also a little bit of a perception of a threat of pan-Turkism. I think that keeps them at bay. But so the greatest demand in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan is for drones, in large part because of the poorly delimited, 600 miles border still. So Turkey has been a major supplier of drones to Kyrgyzstan. Tajikistan has been receiving drones from Iran, and they build their own plant, a facility for producing drones, and there are some speculations that some of those drones ended up on the battlefields in Ukraine.
Am I allowed now for, okay, thanks.
Either way.
So Mark, I thought you were going to go in a different direction with your question, and so your question was Russian military equipment to Central Asia, and just pick up on a point where I think Mariya was going in that direction, and I'll just put even a more direct point on it. Darius Utanjo, one of our PhD students who just defended, we were having a conversation, he's a specialist on Turkey, and he was telling me about how we have Russia using Turkish drones, and Ukraine using Turkish drones on the battlefield at the same time, and those drones are coming through Central Asia, right, for Russia, whereas they're going directly to Ukraine, in the case of Ukraine. But there's been a marked increase in washing machines and freezers, among other things, going to Russia out of all places, Kyrgyzstan, right? And the reason for that, of course, is semiconductors. So there's been a reverse flow with critical technology through Central Asia as a transit point to Russia. So that's why I thought you might have been going in the other direction, just like the trade is going in the other direction now. So I think that's an interesting development. On the point of disinformation, I mean, this was the inception of the whole project. We were interested in disinformation in Central Asia, and the deeper I've gotten into this project, it's morphed into the failures of U.S. foreign policy rather than the success of Russian disinformation. And it really comes through in the focus groups. I mean, the Central Asians, there's not a lot of, I mean, the Central Asians are very critical of Russia, and it's not like the wool's pulled over their eyes. And so yes, you do see correlations between consumption of Russian media and perception of the war, but at the same time in the focus groups, what I'm finding is they're pretty damning of Putin, and they're pretty eyes wide open when it comes to what Russia is doing with Первый канал and other media outlets. So I think a lot of the anti-Western, anti-NATO, anti-US perception as far as the war is concerned is US own goals more than successful Russian propaganda. Which is not to say that the effect isn't there, but I think we really do have to look deeply at some of the failures of US foreign policy. And we seem to use this Russian disinformation as the explanation for everything. It's why Trump is popular. It's why when people are protesting with, on U.S. college campuses. I think we have to pull back a little bit from that explanation. And then just, Jeff, I defer to you and to others here on Turkey, but I think I do recall in Janazin some of the armored vehicles, or maybe it was in Andijan, but I think they came from Turkey. So I mean, there has been these previous relationships. Yeah.
2010.
Yeah, and so I think those were the BTRs. I think some of them were Turkish. So.
Well, just not really much, but a quick point. I would agree in a sense what you said on the Russian information propaganda. And the good example to me is Georgia. It's not the efficiency of Russia's propaganda disinformation, but exactly the ability of the government to use, let's say, deficiencies of the Western approach and turn it upside down, and then use the tropes coming from Moscow to actually quite efficiently speak about why Georgia as a country should actually follow a specific foreign policy line, right? But at the same time, we do see that not speaking about Central Asia, but let's say countries like Belarus, Moldova, etc., we do see that there is some efficiency in the sense that Russia, these societies are very polarized, and for Moscow's quite simple messages is actually quite easy to use this polarization. So that's why if we look at Moldova, we do see that country is basically split, split on who is wrong who is at fault in the war, and the same Belarus. So it's quite a complicated picture.
Are you ready for another round of questions?
Hey, my name is David. I'm an undergraduate student of Professor Zacconi. But the question I have, I think, pertains to the generational divide that was illustrated in one of the slides between the youth vision of the U.S. and their deferment to China, and their dislike for Russia as the governing body. My question concerns specifically about the U.S.-China uprise in popularity. How does Russia navigate that sort of scenario where a potential ally it's learning to increasingly depend more on is at odds? The youth see it as an alternative to Russian sovereignty in the region.
Another question?
Hello, I'm Akbota with GW. I have a question to Mariya, but others, of course, please weigh in if you'd like. But on the prospect of CSTO, So I agree with your argument with authoritarian stability or authoritarian solidarity and security provider, like as the second reason. But with authoritarian solidarity, I think it's more of like Russia's interest in preserving like Russia's solidarity with other authoritarians than other member states, especially because Armenia technically is not an authoritarian country, and because CSTO did not intervene in other internal conflicts outside of Kazakhstan, like in Kyrgyzstan, for example. But as a security provider, it's been mentioned that arms supplies are going down. I assume also, I'm not sure if anyone's aware of this, of the data that Russian contributions to CSTO, which are covering over like 60–70% of the budget of CSTO, are also probably down since the war started. And what do you all think about China as an alternative security provider? If I recall correctly, I think around the time when President Tokayev mentioned, like said to Putin that Kazakhstan's not going to recognize Luhansk and Donetsk, just like they don't Kosovo and Taiwan. China somehow floated around the statement of Xi Jinping that China will intervene to protect the interest of like their investment interest basically in the region. So, and then on the US side, at what point do you think it becomes too complicated and too costly to bandwagon with Russia, because the US support cannot be compatible with CSTO alliance states? Sorry, that was too long.
No, that's great. Thank you. Other questions? Why don't we take that round and then we'll go back to the audience. There are a couple direct
Sure. So David, thanks for your question. I think we have to, I guess, be a little bit tempered in, at least from the point of view of the United States, in our excitement and enthusiasm for this generational change. I'll just give you one anecdote to express why we should be a little bit sober in this analysis. One of my colleagues in Kyrgyzstan, who I'm not going to name directly, used to be very, very critical of Russia and is now very highly placed in the Kyrgyz government and is now very favorably inclined towards Russia. And he was part of this first wave of earlier generations that were critical of Russia, who have since kind of fallen into the orbit. And so the question then becomes, as these younger generations get older and in positions of power, do they effectively get co-opted? I don't know what the answer to that is, but I do think there is some reason to be a little bit worried. And so to your point, how does Russia navigate it? It is kind of through this co-optation that we see at the elite level. With regards to China, Kakin just had a piece in Foreign Affairs where he writes about how Russia might be perfectly content to be a vassal to China. And if China gets more influential in Central Asia, maybe Russia doesn't see that as so much of a problem because Russia itself is so dependent on China. I think that's an interesting thesis. I think the other thing that's going on with China that Russia knows really well is while the Central Asian population is positively inclined towards the government, they're not positively inclined towards Chinese people. There's extreme prejudice against Chinese people in Central Asia. So I think there's limits on that. It's interesting, in the case of the United States, while they're Central Asians in general are negatively inclined towards the US government, there's a lot of affinity towards US culture, US education systems, and US people. So it's a little bit different. I think Russia and Moscow probably feels it still has some cards to play with regards to this. And I think we do have to be a little bit careful in thinking that there's going to be this sea shift to other partners besides Moscow.
Thank you so much for your questions and about the CSTO. I agree on all of the points that you raised. So CSTO is a I had to think about it much more. I agree that Russia's ability to maintain this organization has declined. Its contributions to the CSTO will decline. But I don't think that the CSTO future is contingent upon Armenia's membership. Yeah, it's important to recognize that there are all shades of, the types of regime of the members there. But, CSTO used to have Uzbekistan, it exited, it didn't fall apart. So I thought about, Armenia's case. CSTO will survive even if Armenia exits. But I'm also not quite sure if Armenia will exit. And the reason being as follows. Even though Russia did not come to help Armenia in the case of its conflict with Azerbaijan, Russia's hands have been bound by, de facto agreement to support Armenia. But Russia has been seeking rapprochement with Azerbaijan in large part because of the North-South transnational project. And if Armenia exits CSTO, Russia's hands will be completely untied. It will really seek, untethered economic collaboration with Azerbaijan, and Armenia doesn't want this to happen. So again, for Armenia's leadership, it is again the hope. I'm not saying that it's gonna, develop in the way Armenia wants, but if it does exit, it's just gonna facilitate Russia's closer ties with Azerbaijan and empowering Baku even further. So for a different reason, I think Armenia will probably stick around. So I said, I think this year is going to be very indicative in terms of what and how Russia will be doing, because there are a number of counterterrorism drills that are on agenda. I will probably keep an eye on how, the size, who's going to be funded, who's going to be participating. So I think it's going to be indicative of how CSTO will continue performing that function in the future. And with regard to China, China is an interesting case. I don't think China wants to play a role of the security provider in Central Asia. And I think Central Asian republics understand that really, really well. China has so far made considerable inroads in security in Tajikistan. So we know that since 2016, it has had like a small outpost in Nagorno-Karabakh, and it has recently been announced that it's building another one for the Tajik military in Horog region. But if we think in terms of why is China doing that? China, cannot rely on Russia's 201st Motorized Division nearby Dushanbe, which is not in a very good position to protect that difficult to patrol, defend porous border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan. And then think about China's border, that's Xinjiang, right, the Muslim majority Uyghur population. So I think a lot of things that China does as far as security measures are concerned, it's China's security interests, and less so, it's packaged as if it was Central Asian security. But China's been a very pragmatic actor, and I think the Central Asian governments understand it really, really well. So I don't think it has the political will to play the kind of role of the security provider that some of the Central Asian governments need or would like to play. So thank you.
Any thoughts?
Okay. On China, I fully agree with Mariya. I don't think China has the political will of becoming a security provider for Central Asia, but it has the political will to keep the political umbrella for Central Asia, and I think it's very, very, very important. Russia knows that Central Asia is important for China, that it is China's strategic neighborhood, so it shouldn't mess too much, that's one thing. Second thing, I will a little bit disagree with the colleagues, with Eric. I think it is pro-Russian propaganda that is kind of, that results in the kind of this anti-US feelings, and not so much failures of US policies, because people are not political. They don't care about what US foreign policy goals are, but they do watch Russian TV, and their worldview is shaped by these Russian narratives, and I would say it's less US policies and more identity politics and gender issues and this kind of stuff that is divisive here, and it is kind of very skillfully used by Russia, and it's something people care about. kind of gender roles and, well, what does it mean, kind of they are imposing these things on us, and that's something you would hear, kind of when you talk to taxi drivers, right? Like these are ad hoc focus groups, basically. But differently from Georgia, in Central Asia, kind of leaders don't use tropes that much. Particularly, I would say Kazakh and Uzbek leaders try to stay away kind of from the tropes. You can hear occasionally Jabarov kind of reproducing something, or the Turkmen, leaders saying something along the lines, but yeah, the Kazakh and Uzbek leaderships, they kind of try not to, and they want to be kind of accepted and in international clubs and have handshakes with Western leaders and all that. The authoritarian solidarity also a little bit disagree. I like, Mariya, your approach of risks and opportunities. Definitely there is a risk kind of like being members of the organization. There is a risk in being a member of the organization. There is a risk in leaving the organization. Mm-hmm. You need kind of to calculate, kind of your risks and opportunities. But authoritarian leaders in Central Asia, they are both, they kind of count on Russia and they're afraid of Russia. Because if Russia doesn't like your authoritarian leader, as we saw in the case of Bakiyev, kind of it would very much kind of help to let him go, right? And Moscow had pretty good relations with the interim government, right? That came to power in the wake of the revolution, right? Much more democratic. So there is that, it's not that they're kind of, well, we're authoritarian, we're solidarity. Yes, to some extent, but there are limits. How much you can count on that. Okay. Yeah.
Can we respond?
Sure, it's a conversation.
Right.
This is good. There's some disagreement here. It makes it more interesting, right? I think there's something to what you're saying, Nargis, and far be it for me to disagree with Nargis, but I think it could be both, right? And I think that's what we were saying, that harnessing the propaganda at the same time, there is this Central Asia specific agency, right? What Central Asians are doing is not merely the result, their opinions are expressing is not merely the result of Russian propaganda telling them how to think, right? And I know that's not what you're saying, but on this, the gender stuff. 2011, Obama comes out with making LGBTQ+ as integral to U.S. foreign policy. That blew up in Central Asia. Yes, it blew up with the help of Moscow, but it also blew up with Central. And so that was Obama, right? That wasn't Putin, right? The own goals that we saw in the wake of the 2010 ethnic conflicts between Uzbeks and Kyrgyzstan, that was the ethically probably correct, but still very problematic, condemnation of Kyrgyzstan for the repression of Uzbeks in southern Kyrgyzstan. Arguably, there could have been a better way of handling that situation, which wouldn't necessarily have antagonized the Kyrgyz government as much as it did. Particularly, we have an interim. I know that's somewhat controversial to say. The whole U.S. democratization effort, Brussels. What we're seeing in Georgia right now with the foreign agents law. The way that the West has been handling, the U.S. has been handling these issues in Central Asia are so clumsy that it's very easy for local political actors, be it in Tbilisi, be it in Bishkek, Tashkent, to seize on these things and turn it against the United States. So I'm not denying that Russian propaganda is active, but it's using very rich material that Brussels and Washington's provided.
What clumsy things they did in the region, the Americans?
Well, the whole democratization effort from 1991 to 2001 until 9/11. The whole LGBTQ+ thing. That's not going to resonate in Central Asia, just as it doesn't resonate in much of the United States.
It resonates with some people in Central Asia. It doesn't
with you and me.
People in Central Asia, but but that's exactly what I'm saying. It's not so much or you consider it part of the foreign policy. If you consider it part of the foreign policy, okay. But I think it's overall kind of there is this divide, there are traditional values and there is kind of new values and we don't like them. And yeah, kind of it's bigger than that.
Let's get a question from Chris.
Yes. That was a two-finger for Nargis. I'm Chris Bort, formerly of the National Intelligence Council. And is there something that the United States could be doing better? I mean, even if you disagree with Eric's point there, I think Eric makes a strong argument about how U.S. policy has made mistakes and has hurt his position. But whether it's U.S. or not, what can the U.S. be doing better to get its messages across in the region, whether or not it's a failure of past messaging?
Let me add also one more question for everyone, and then we probably have enough time for a final word. And then actually, one more from the back.
Yes, one more. Thank you. Tatiana Figure, visiting professor in Trust School of Policy and Government. I have a very brief question about the sanction evasion because I work on the sanction evasion issues. So we understand that many of these countries are involved in sanction evasion schemes, and they are enablers for sanction evasion instruments. So what do you see, and how do you assess the effectiveness of sanction regimes, and how we can make it more efficient? So I don't want to answer my question because I want to hear you regarding this issue. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'll add one more just to spark conversation. We haven't heard a lot from the panel about how various countries and international institutions' relations with Ukraine have changed since the beginning of the war. So if there's anything, kind of evolution or transformation, growing together, growing apart, we focused a lot about how their relations with Russia have evolved. But what about with Ukraine? Is there anything notable that you would want to bring to our attention since the February 2020 invasion? Ryhor, we haven't heard from you for a while. Want to kick off some final remarks?
It's a fascinating discussion, and I was thinking that it's only with a glass of wine that's ready to continue. On Ukraine, just obviously there is no relationship between Ukraine and Belarus as such. Although I'll make it a bit, I'll come from a different angle and say that the Ukrainian government doesn't really have a good strategy how to deal with its neighbors. So with any neighbor, it's basically there is a problem. And we may argue where it comes from, but there are issues and quite significant ones. And some of them are stemming from Kiev, and that's the outline of a paper I'll be working on for the next autumn. Anyway, when it comes to sanction evasion, very briefly, there are problems, and sanctions can work better, especially the EU sanctions. And I think to start with is better enforcement and secondary sanctions. So something that, and my point would be sanctions would never be perfect, but at least it's something that we can start from and then just go after. And when it comes to the US, I've been mostly working on the EU, and I could say that the EU has a lot of problems how it deals in the region for a long time. And how it can do better to me is to have its approach more tailor-made to the local context. That for me will be the first step, not coming with things which will be absolutely extremely divisive domestically. And I wouldn't say give a ball in Russia's hands, but like really more of a benefit the incumbents to use it to polarize even further and entrench power.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. So on the effectiveness of sanctions, I think the United States understands, and the Central Asian governments, particularly because of Kazakhstan, they've done a very good job explaining of how dependent their economies are on Russia. So, very, very strict enforcement of the secondary sanctions would have detrimental effect on the economic well-being of these countries. And so it's very difficult to control the export of dual good use. But I think the United States has shown enough patience, but there's also understanding that reselling goods to Russia is becoming very, very risky. Having said that, it's also important to separate like what's going on formally, what's going on informally, and controlling the informal flow of contraband and so on and so forth will be difficult. With regard to the United States in Central Asia, I think the United States does face a challenge in Central Asia because Central Asia has never been, it has never had direct interest in Central Asia. Central Asia has always been a byproduct of United States interests elsewhere, Afghanistan, or now great power competition with China and Russia. And just to add into this tailored projects, let me give you specific, so I recently was in the State Department, we were talking about how can the US Department of State foster all good things in Central Asia? And one of the journalists gave a very great example of how a tailored project could look like. Instead of operating on this strategic level, human rights, democracy, go at the lowest possible level. And what you will realize that in the community context, human rights are conceived as a right to be able to bury your ancestors close to the village without crossing the border with, if it's in Kyrgyzstan, with Tajikistan. And this is how the tailored project, or tailored and effective US investments may look like. But it just really requires the United States to recalibrate its approach that has been kind of off-the-shelf approach to promoting these kinds of things in Central Asia. Yeah, I'll stop here.
I like this policy initiative of tailored approaches. I think maybe this is the way forward. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, if you look at U.S. policy towards the region, it's not only has it been inconsistent, but it's been perceived as, I don't know, maybe duplicitous isn't the right word, but there's a lot of frustration, right? So you had democracy promotion in the 1990s, and then it was all securitization in the 2010s, and then followed by negligence under the Trump administration, and then followed by we're not quite sure what right now. And so there's a lot of whiplash with regards to how the U.S. has engaged the region. You've been in, in the not the driver's seat. You've been following this. I don't want to attribute the policies as, of course, not the NICS, NIC, right? National Health. Yeah, it's elsewhere, but it's I think it's been very hard for Central Asian countries and society to negotiate. And one of the things. It was actually a really interesting piece in the Moscow Times about Georgia and the foreign agents law that is has been passed. I'm not sure if it has been, right? All the protests in Tbilisi right now, and there's this widespread sense in Georgia, but also in Central Asia, that there's this whole class of NGOs that have been essentially created by the West that is not really part of civil society. And that has been supported by the U.S. and the West for a long time, that leaves out large portions of the population. There's just a lot of frustration. So this idea of tailored responses that engage interests at the local level, that employ Central Asians and not Western consultants like me, right? That might work well. And I guess the other thing, as far as the different policies, one place where the U.S. and Brussels and Europe really shine is in education. One of the interesting findings that are coming out of the surveys is if you ask Central Asian parents where they would like to send their kids to get a higher education, even though the same people express a lot of animosity towards Washington and Europe, they largely want to send their kids to the U.S. and Europe for higher education. So there's certain strengths that the U.S. and the West can build on, and education, I think, is one of the leading areas.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think we're a little bit exaggerating democracy promotion that's taking place in Central Asia and the backlash against it. I don't think Central Asia was viewed as a particularly promising area for kind of democratization. Maybe it was some early progress in the early 90s in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, but by mid-90s, I think it was clear that it's not a very happening area in this regard. So. But I would say I don't see any big mistakes that the U.S. has made in the region. There were made big mistakes in Afghanistan, but it's a kind of attached story, connected story, but it's not Central Asia. But it's narrowly defined Central Asia story. because exactly it was not a priority, and kind of the policies were calibrated. Yes, not too much attention, and maybe kind of there were some inconsistencies, some ups and downs, and and a few times there was a fear in the region that the U.S. will lose interest, right? And kind of Washington was trying to signal that no, we will not lose the interest. And but I think overall it was in good hands here. So I would disagree. I have kind of better impression of the overall situation. So in terms of what can be done, that's something I've been thinking about. I think now kind of the values area, that's the kind of the ideas, that's the battleground, and I think more can be done there, and it's really sad that the funding for example, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty is going down, so kind of these projects that have so much value for money. I mean, really, they are, I don't know how expensive they are, but probably not, compared to aircraft carrier, I don't know, like a fighter, but they're so effective in kind of like information, ideas, values, education. That's the area where the U.S. is so strong and can actually draw on that, because the new generations, they are drawn to English language content, so it will be actually relatively easy to reach them. I like tailor-made project, but I don't know how much you can actually change the situation on the ground with this small community kind of community project. I think something more kind of policy, targeting big policies and kind of changing really something on the ground. And I like the current USAID project, Power Central Asia. I think it's a very important project, and it's going well. It's helping to kind of upgrade the power systems in Central Asian states, and it helps them to work better together. So I think that's an area where more can be done. Energy transition is so important for the region, and kind of these important connections can be created. And well, now that there is this dialogue on critical minerals, let's see what comes out of it. But that's something of substance where the U.S. can work with the region, in the region.
We probably have to.
Just on
Sure.
human rights. I think on one, I said that there was kind of overwhelming democracy promotion, but it was important that the U.S. was supporting the human rights community, and so keeping this perestroika flame alive. Yeah, maybe the majority are still not fully on board with this, but I do see certain liberalization trends in the region, and I think that there was a kind of these efforts of Europeans, Americans to keep the flame alive. It helps actually to push the region, the countries of the region in the right direction.
Well, on that note, I think it's a good one to go out on. Thank you very much to the four of you and all of you for joining us today.